We do have a pretty amazing fall series lined up. Summer Wednesdays, summer Fridays, occasional Saturdays. But before I tell you about them, I want to do a quick plug for two different sites, both who interviewed Micah Perks, which is sort of interesting. The first one is a blog called The Book Jam. It's run by Lisa Christie and Lisa Caddo, who both live in Norwich and are both former booksellers here at the store. And they do about 3 posts a month. One is an author from here, and the other 2 are books on a theme of some sort. And I encourage you to check that out. And the other one is a website called Literary North, which is run by Sherry Altman and Rebecca Siegel. And Sherry is also a former Norwich bookstore bookseller. We don't let them get very far away. And they've created, it's a really elegant compilation of events, readings, and workshops, both for authors and for the general public, all around northern New England. And they run occasional extended interviews like the one with our guest tonight. So I encourage you to check that one out too. So they both have subscriptions. Neither of them inundate you with too much stuff. So anyway, so next Wednesday we have Lyme writer W.D. Wetherill. He'll be here with his new book. It's a collection of stories called Where We Live. And Walter is one of our favorite authors here at the store, so I encourage you to read the book even if you can't make the reading. And in November we have children's books from Lizzie Boyd, who lives here in town, and Tommy DePaula, who's from New London, and they both have really special new books. Tommy was just interviewed on public radio earlier this week, I can't remember which day, about his new book, Quiet, which basically is about putting your devices away. We also have Madeline Kunin coming, and George Hal Colt with his new book on 1968, and it's an incredible read. And we added three more events off-site just this week. I'm not going to go into them, but stay tuned, sign up for our newsletter or check our website. They'll be up there soon. But tonight we have Peter Orner, who's professor of English and Creative Writing at Dartmouth, to thank for the opportunity to host Micah Perks tonight. Peter is the author of 2 novels, 2 story collections, and most recently a memoir in essays called Am I Alone Here? Notes on Reading to Live and Living to Read. He's also edited 3 nonfiction books and they're oral histories, and he has a new book coming, I just found out, is coming in June of 2019, so stay tuned for the celebration of that one. And tonight we're welcoming Micah Perks, She grew up on commune in the Adirondacks. She attended high school in Middlebury, so she's got a Vermont connection. And she received her BA and MFA from Cornell. She now lives with her family in California, where she co-directs the creative writing program and is a professor in the literature department at the University of California in Santa Cruz. And I understand one of her Santa Cruz neighbors has just moved to the area and is here tonight with us. So, you know, it is a small world. Micah has received numerous accolades and prizes for her writing, including 5 Pushcart Prize nominations and a National Endowment for the Arts Literary Fellowship grant, among others. Usually I end my introductions with a quote from somebody if I can't come up with as eloquent an expression or a description of the writing. And tonight I want to read what Kelly Link wrote about her review of this new collection, True Love and Other Dreams of Miraculous Escape, which is an incredible title, and it really fits the collection. It's very cool. She wrote, "A writer whose stories are endearingly hard-headed and tender-hearted, whose characters are so very alive that they practically escape off the page when you encounter them. This collection will cure what ails you." So without further ado, help me welcome Peter and Micah. And there is water behind if you want.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Oh, yeah, that sounds good. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming, and I want to thank Norwich Books and Literary North and Peter Orner for bringing me here. It's lovely to be here. It feels home-ish for me. You know, it feels great to be back in Vermont, and I haven't been in the fall in Vermont in the fall for 20 years. So just the smell, the wood smoke, the leaves, the cold, feels great. So I'm going to read, what we're going to do tonight, I'm going to read a little bit, and then Peter and I are going to talk a little bit, and then I'll read a little more, and then if we all want to talk, and then that's it. It should be relatively painless. I'm actually going to read to you first from something that isn't in the book, but I was asked by this magazine to talk about the research that I did for the collection, and so I wrote this thing, and I'm going to read it to you. It's called 10 Things I Learned While Writing My linked short story collection, True Love and Other Dreams of Miraculous Escape. So all of this information, all this research is in the book and in the short stories, in the different short stories. Number 1, Houdini's last meal was farmer's chop suey. In 1926, when he was dying in the hospital of a ruptured appendix, Harry Houdini said he had a yen for the dish. They ordered out from a Jewish deli. Farmer's chop suey is Eastern European Jewish immigrant in origin, named after the American Chinese food American Jews love to eat. Houdini adored his mother. Once, he bought one of Queen Victoria's gowns at auction and gave it to his mom, who was from Appleton, Wisconsin, by way of a Hungarian shtetl. Houdini made a party, and his mother attended in Queen Victoria's dress. Houdini said it was the best day of his life. Houdini's mother was buried in Queen Victoria's dress. To make farmer's chop suey, toss radishes, cucumbers, and peppers in sour cream and cottage cheese. Number 2. Online, you can buy a dildo shaped like a pink beaver. The beaver's tongue vibrates. Number 3. In a town called San Jose, just a few hours' distance from San Francisco, lived the old widow of the Winchester fortune. From 1888 to 1922, she built a house of crazy proportions, supposedly directed by ghosts. Even from the outside, you could tell something was strange. There were 13 stained glass windows that had 13 panels fashioned in the shape of spider webs. But no one except the servants could get into that house. They say the front door had never been unlocked. When Teddy Roosevelt came to call, no one answered the door, and he left in a huff. This house was labyrinthian, outrageous, offensive. Stairs ending at the ceiling, a stairwell leading to a door that opened onto a wall. An entire wing seemed to be blocked off. There were 160 rooms, all with the finest decorations, all eerily empty of inhabitants. Number 4. Kitsune are Japanese spirit foxes. Kitsune can generate fire with their tails. They are tricksters, shapeshifters. They can even transform into humans. You will know them by their golden eyes and their bite. Number 5, definition of the word monster. 1, an organism formed of various animals in combination like a centaur or griffin. 2, anyone grotesquely deviating from the normal shape or character. 3, anything with abnormal form or structure. Number 6, an Australian photographer named Spencer Tunick traveled all around the world. In each location, he would put a notice in the paper. Come at 8 a.m. to have a group portrait of your country taken, naked. 4,000 people turned out in Santiago, Chile in 2002. It was a cold day, winter, drizzling, and people were rubbing their hands together, making jokes. 400 evangelists protested nearby. People were waving the Chilean flag, singing the national anthem. Right at 8 a.m., they all undressed, jeans and suits and dresses lying at their feet. 4,000 of them all together for the world to see, laughing and freezing, desnudos. Spencer Tunick wrote that he lay on the ground, looked up at the sky, and felt like he was dreaming. And I have to tell you that I just read this in Palo Alto last week, and I read it, and then this woman raised her hand and she said, I was there. And then she sent me an email to prove it, and yep, she was there naked. Yeah. Number 7. A strain of marijuana called 24 karat gold is purported to smell and taste like tangerines. Number 8. The noise coming from the Rosetta Comet sounds like a squirrel chattering. Number 9. Anne Hutchinson, called the American Jezebel, was banished from Boston in 1638 for interpreting the Bible. Anne Hutchinson believed in friendship with all people, and when her husband died, she moved to the New Netherlands outback with her 7 youngest children. She had 15 in all. They made a home between the Dutch and the Siwanoy. Then, the Dutch massacred 80 Siwanoy women and children. The Siwanoy sent a message to Anne and told her there would be retaliation. They warned Anne to leave the area to avoid harm. But Anne trusted in God and good neighbors. The Siwanoy massacred Anne Hutchinson and her children, all but her small daughter Susan, who the Siwanoy discovered hidden in the cleft of a rock. The chief of the Siwanoy, Wampage, changed his name to Anne to honor Anne Hutchinson and adopted Susan as his daughter. Susan lived for 8 years with the Siwanoy before she was ransomed, some say against her will. I wonder how often Susan Hutchinson thought of her parents, Anne, and how she missed them. Number 10. The Spanish word ojalá has a breathy, warm, open sound. It has Arabic roots from pre-1492 Spain, where once upon a time Jews and Arabs and Latinos all lived together, surrounded by arches and mosaic tiles, by the smell of rose, hyacinth, musk, and amber. O Allah, it comes from, O Allah, I entreat you. It means hope. Thanks. So, Peter, do you want to come on up? Yeah. Also, I want to give a little shout out. I love this book. I don't know how many, I'm alone here. No, am I alone here? It's a book of small essays, memoir, and mixed between memoir and essays about books, and it's beautiful. It's really little kind of micro pieces, and I strongly urge you to read it. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask Micah a few questions, and then you're going to read again, right?
Yeah.
You're going to read a story?
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
Okay, good. So, and then we're going to open up to you all, and thank you all for coming. It's really nice to be here. This is my new hometown. I've been here a few months now. It's been great. I love this store. Thank you for having us, Liza. I will speak up. Thank you for having us in this great store. You all know that this is, there's not a lot of bookstores left, right? And so, supporting this store is so critical to this area. So I will get off my soapbox, but my students have heard this. Some of whom are here have heard me give this speech, but it's incredibly important that we, because everyone's so upset when the stores close, right? But they seem to use those websites.
No names.
No names, but you all know who you are. Anyway, I want to start by asking just about research, because you started with that essay.
Yeah.
There is so many, I'm teaching a class at Dartmouth right now, and Micah's going to come talk to my class tomorrow morning, where we're talking about how writers, creative writers, nonfiction writers, poets, novelists, short story writers use factual material in their work, and how it can drive a certain story. And you started out by talking about Houdini, so let's talk about Houdini, which is always nice to talk about Houdini.
Yeah.
What was it about Houdini that made you want to create a fictional world around him, and not only him, but the narrator of the first story, which is all about Houdini?
Yeah, excellent question. I love Houdini. I kind of have a crush on Houdini, actually. He's super hot.
He was sort of, he was a real sex symbol, right?
Yeah, he was,
Serious.
and for good reason. So, that story came about because of sort of two separate obsessions. One was I was super obsessed with Sarah Winchester from The Mystery House, which I read to you a little bit about. And I tried for years to write a story about Sarah Winchester, and I would try all these different ways of getting into that story, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. I couldn't figure out how to get into I kind of kept trying to do, if any of you have read Angela Carter, I kept trying to do this sort of Angela Carter thing with Sarah Winchester. It wasn't working. And at the same time, I've always loved Houdini. And so several years ago, there was a Houdini exhibit in San Francisco, near where I live, at the Jewish Museum. So I went there, and I found out that Houdini he had been at the San Francisco World's Fair in the turn of the century, first decade of the 20th century, and also that he had visited Sarah Winchester's house. So I felt like, aha, this is a way in, and I felt much more comfortable somehow with the Houdini material than I did with the Sarah Winchester material. And so I had this Jewish journalist come up with this idea that he was covering the World Fair. He had run out of ideas, and so he thought, oh, I'll have Houdini. I'll ask Houdini if he'll come in and hide in a milk can, which was one of his staple tricks, and get into the Winchester house and kind of unmask the whole, because nobody could get in there. And it fits because Houdini, he spent his life, although I think he wished that there was an afterlife. At the same time, he was
very suspicious.
He was very suspicious, and he spent his whole life unmasking spiritualists. So he would go to seances, and then he would figure out the tricks they were using. He wrote a whole book about it, actually. So he was the perfect person to go in, and yet a big part of him wanted there to be, really wanted there to be an afterlife and to find out.
How do you animate a figure like him, who we all know that name? Can I read a little bit of the story? You're not going to read from the story.
Yeah,
right?
you can read a little bit.
Can I just read it? Because
it's
the narrator.
More your
who's
voice
this,
than my voice.
Who's
Yeah.
is the narrator who's this journalist who is intrigued by him, and he's watching him do the Chinese water torture cell escape. And this is what I'll just read a couple sentences. I sat in my velvet-covered seat, holding my own breath, and thinking how I was like Houdini. Like him, I tried to erase my foreign accent, never went to shul, was taken for a real American. It just struck me as you were kind of driving into a seam of Houdini's identity as sort of this guy who had completely reinvented himself.
Yeah.
Hungarian Jewish parents in Wisconsin.
Son of a rabbi, yeah.
Then but your entry point is this, who's actually the grandfather of another character who actually comes in the next story. I want to ask you about things being linked, but I'm just wondering about that, about
the voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
asking. I think the voice really, came a lot from my own grandfather, who that he's later. He didn't, he wasn't even born at that moment, or just being born. But I think the character is sort of very, very loosely based on my grandpa and on his cadences and the way he spoke. And so I think it came from my grandfather was a socialist communist, and so was the journalist. And my grandpa had a very overpowering mother, and also, was very excited about being an American, and in the turn of the century, or a little bit later. So I think it came from him, the voice and some of the slang that he uses. And Houdini himself, for me, he kind of is the voice or the ghost that hovers over the whole collection, because Houdini is this incredible escape artist, and he's really all about miraculous escapes and getting out of any fix. But
he has this sort of groundedness in his love for his mother, and it's also his sort of his Jewishness actually comes out in the story. He's always asking for Jewish foods. There's this identity that a lot of people don't associate with him, but you sort of kind of kept driving at, and I felt like I got to know him better. Now.
I guess that's part of, since I'm Jewish, that's part of what I like about Houdini, is that he's also a Jewish immigrant, in a similar way that my own family are Jewish immigrants. Yeah.
Can I ask you about interconnectedness? You refer to the story as a collection being a linked story, but I think it might be different than people's association with that idea of a story collection, in the sense of the range in this collection is quite remarkable to my eyes. It's not, sometimes you read a story collection, especially one that is referred to as a link story, and you get a similar voice and a similar rhythm, and in the sense of, novel would have sort of the same characters all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
This is not that.
No.
You turn the page and it's a completely different universe, although they're, right?
Yeah.
Could you explain?
Yeah. So it's a link collection in that it's basically, so the first story takes place, again in the early 20th century, but after that's contemporary, and it's this character Albert's grandchildren, Isaac and Sadie, and it takes place on the central coast of California, and it's the same characters from different angles and different perspectives. Sometimes they'll be very tangential to the story, sometimes they'll be the main character, but it is true that one story is kind of magical realism, and then another story is noir, and then another story is realist and kind of comic. So the kind of story it is changes a lot, but they are the same universe of characters in each story. And that came about because when I wanted to have a collection, and I'd written these stories over about a 15-year period, 10 or 15-year period, sort of in between longer projects, and then I put them all out, and looked at them, and I realized that it wasn't going to work. Right? They were weirdly similar, but not similar enough. So for example, there was in one story there's this Chilean scientist with this brilliant smile. And then in another story, there's this Argentinian activist with this brilliant smile. And in this other story, there's this Chilean professor with a brilliant smile. And my husband is a Chilean professor with a brilliant smile. So there were all these iterations, but it just, it was weird, and they couldn't really work as a story.
So did you go back in and rewrite? Because these stories, they do speak to each other in a very strange way.
Yeah. Even
though the range is different.
I did go back in, and I completely, I started with, well, that's the same character. It can't be all different characters. And then, because if he's the same character, then the people around him have to be the same characters, and they're all set in the same place. And if I changed the setting for a lot of the stories, and then at first it was really hard because they'd all been published, or not all, but many of them had been published separately, and so it felt that they were done, and it was hard to get in and open them up but then once I did, it was really exciting. And for example, just one of the things that I found really exciting about it was that I ended up changing some of the genders of some of the main characters. So for example, there's this guy Isaac in the story, and then I realized that he was a lot like this woman in another story, so I changed this woman into Isaac. So suddenly I'm writing a story about a guy, when before the whole story was about a woman. So I'm going along thinking about the story, revising it, and then I get to the scene where now Isaac, he had a hard day, he bursts into tears and cries himself to sleep. And so I found myself having a lot of resistance. Like I thought, no way, he can't burst into tears and cry himself to sleep. Maybe he could have tear in his eye and then go lift weights or whatever. But, no way. But then I thought, why couldn't he? There's people in my family. Peter cries all the time.
I cry myself to sleep
every night. And so,
You want to read?
Read from that? Yeah.
Or read from whatever you were going to read.
Yeah, I'll read. So anyway, I'm going to read a little bit I'll read a little piece from, I'm going to read this even though Peter didn't want me to. So this is actually Isaac, and this originally was a woman. So I don't know if that's interesting, but it's interesting to me. But now the story used to be called There Once Was a Woman Who Longed for a Child, but now it's called There Once Was a Man Who Longed for a Child. And this is about Isaac. After his wife left him for the karate teacher, the man raised his daughter up until the September she left for cooking school. That October, the man sorted through all the things his daughter had bagged to throw out and kept most of it, and sent her 3 care packages. In November, he truly began to live alone. November, the most beautiful month of the year in Central California. Beautiful because of the cool weather and the slanted light and the magenta-colored leaves on the liquid amber maples in Bierce Park across from the man's apartment. The man used to take his daughter to karate lessons in the park, but now, through his window, he watched the retirees practice Tai Chi in rough synchronicity, and the homeless people debate the park ranger, and the dogs collegially sniff each other's butts. He watched for hours. Sometimes he became mesmerized by the gold to wine-colored leaves on the trees, their gentle breathing. On weekdays, when he unlocked the door after work, the evening stretched out, all his. For dinner, he ate what he wanted. Sometimes a rotisserie chicken from the grocery store, sometimes a 3-egg omelet with ketchup. After dinner, the man drank Dragon's Breath IPA and binge-watched Friday Night Lights. In the season 1 finale, we find out that the football coach and his hot wife have made a mistake, getting pregnant when their daughter is already grown. And then in the second season, they end up with a gremlin-faced baby named Gracie Belle, sporting a yellow mullet. The man wondered why they had chosen an infant so lacking in star appeal. But oddly, it was around then that he began to long for a baby of his own. The chubby legs pincering his waist, the milk-sour smell of its head, and all the cute things they said when they began to talk. Accompanied by his beer, he now found himself watching YouTube videos of babies saying the darndest things. His favorite was a 2-year-old trying to unbuckle her seatbelt. Her father asked if she needed help, and the 2-year-old yelled, "Worry about yourself! Worry about yourself!" Finally, the man thought he might be getting malnourished from lack of vegetables. So the next Sunday, he forced himself to go to the farmer's market. He wandered the stalls, pondering over the largest tomato or zucchini or apple, then dropping them in his backpack. He came upon the last stall selling gourds and dried flowers and branches and dried grasses, all ablaze in fall colors. On the far left of the front table, on a blue dish towel decorated with red foxes, lay a pile of shriveled roots. One was curved like a C. The top part of the root had 2 protrusions, almost like bulging eyes, and it actually had a green tendril, maybe a 1/2 inch long, growing up from its head. The proprietor was busy helping a customer choose between a bouquet of glitter-dried corn and a bouquet of cattails, but a teenage girl with an afro like a halo sat on a folding chair behind the back table reading from the tablet. The man said, "Do you know what these roots are?" "Barleycorn," said the girl, not glancing up. "For chickens." "I don't think these are barleycorns," the man said. "There's some kind of root or tuber. This one is sprouting." The girl shrugged. "I just work here." The man looked over to the owner of the stall for assistance, but the customer had begun to cry. "How much are they?" The girl didn't look up. $3 each. "That's crazy," the man laughed. The owner was now embracing the weeping customer, so the man paid the high price and secured the root in the front zippered pocket of his backpack. Back home, he took a pot with a dead cactus out of his daughter's room. He pulled out the cactus with an oven mitt to avoid the prickers, then buried the root just up to its eyes in the dry dirt. He watered it under the faucet. Then he put it on the windowsill above the sink. Why not? When he got home from work on Monday, the little stem was at least a 1/2 inch taller, and there was a tiny furrowed leaf coming out of it. Down below and between the bulging eyes, there was another lump. It looked almost like the top of a wide nose. By the next weekend, a second tendril was curling out of its head. The first tiny leaf had opened, and a whole face had emerged, just the chin left in the dirt. A pug nose with no nostrils, but still, it could not be denied that the so-called barleycorn was thriving. Only 2 weeks, and its chin was out of the dirt, raised a little, the beige freckled head tilted over to the right, almost as if it were resting its cheek on the ground. 3 small, new heart-shaped leaves had sprouted out of its head. He was sure, almost sure, he imagined telling his daughter Lila. The weeks went by, and the barleycorn continued to emerge from the dirt until one day the man noticed its head was filthy. He got a washcloth from the bathroom, wrung it out, and carefully began to clean the little face. When the warm cloth was over the barleycorn's nose, it sneezed. "Did you hear that?" the man said out loud. The man pulled the cloth off. He was almost sure he had heard a tiny, brilliant sneeze. Nothing now, no movement. The man had an idea. He warmed some milk on the stove, dipped his pinky to make sure it was right. He dripped some into the soil. The next morning, his barley corn had grown arms. Dirty, rootlet-covered, lumpy little arms like 2 carrots, except beige, reaching out of the dirt, reaching up like, hold me, like, more milk, please. The man couldn't stop smiling as he warmed milk for both himself and the barley corn. He stood by the sink, and they both drank from the same mug. And then, the very next day, his daughter came home from break. Can I finish there? Yeah.
It's a beautiful story, and it's hard to explain this collection because when you turn the page, again, like I said, you're in a different universe. This one is extraordinarily melancholy, and I'm just wondering did you think about different registers when you were putting it together? You know, in terms of how you...
Yeah, well, I think I ended up more thinking the book actually became chronological. So I ended up, it really moves forward through time. So even though it's weaving in and out, and I think I was more, I became really attached. If you read it, I would love it if you read it from beginning to end instead of, some people read short story collections and they read one and then another. To me, it's really important that you read, in the order because it does move forward in time and it does, like you find out new, how people are doing, later on and you come back, you kind of sort of check back in and they've gotten divorced or had children or
Sadie and Daniel especially.
Yeah, Sadie and Daniel. Yeah, there's a couple that move away from each other and come back to each other and struggling with true love and with miraculous escape throughout the book.
Can you talk a little bit about Anne Hutchinson and there's so many other historical figures. Ambrose Bierce is in this book.
Yeah.
King Philip. People know King Philip.
Yeah.
What is it? And I'm holding here Micah's novel, which came out 2 years ago.
2 years ago,
right?
yeah.
So I've been on Micah all week, and it's been great. And I'm teaching this class I'm teaching this book in my class, and the character in here is Mary Rowlandson, who actually. So I'm just wondering it goes back to my original question, but your sort of obsession with these historical figures and how it drives your fiction, because I think in both of these books it seems to be, which is different if you compare Pagan Time and your other novel.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I don't really, I think it's not different. I mean, to me,
different obsession.
Different obsession.
It seems like you're
they're
after something
Yeah,
different.
but I feel like they're all historical, and I feel like, so my mother is the child of Jewish immigrants in the 20th century, and then my father, who's right here, is British, and also came here to the U.S. in the 60s, and then I grew up in the wilderness in this kind of intentional community, and so I felt very apart from the kind of mainstream of U.S. culture for a long time, and then when I finally emerged, I think that I became obsessed with U.S. history and trying to figure out where did I fit into this, and I came up with this insistence that the trajectory of U.S. history right from the beginning, right from the Puritans, has been a history of utopian experiments. Maybe some of you, so definitely the Puritans, and then maybe some of you know, but there was a ton of utopian experiments in the 19th century, pre-Civil War, and also in the 1960s. And so I just think I keep going sort of back to that, and really interested in looking at the way people have kind of tried to live together in ways that are non-traditional, whether that is, that story about Anne Hutchinson and her daughter Susan is so poignant to me, the way that she lived her mother was a utopianist, and then she lived with the native people who killed her mother, and the kind of cross-cultural tragedy, but also beautiful too. And I think that all of my books, kind of everything I write in a way, just goes back to that obsession, I think, with trying to look at the U.S. from a sort of utopian.
And it's not just you; it's your characters often that have these
that's
obsessions.
true.
And what becomes us, it's the
Yeah.
character is sort of overcome
Yeah.
with a connection between.
Yeah.
So it feels like you're mining this connection that you personally feel.
Yeah.
Is it because you grew up in such a way in this utopian commune sphere? Pagan Time, which is Micah's memoir, which is so great. You should all get it because it's one of the great memoirs of utopian societies and otherwise, and how they go wrong and go right. And there's a lot of beautiful, nice things that happen. And also other things.
I myself was obsessed with Mary Rowlandson there's this book called, has anybody read The Captivity and Restoration of Mary Rowlandson? So it was actually the first book of prose written by a woman in the Americas in the 17th century, and it's about her, a memoir about her being captured by native people during King Philip's War, and I think you'll find it shocking. It's not like you think Puritan people sound. It's not ornate prose. It's pretty straightforward prose. It's mostly about her starving. She was starving, and because the native people were also starving, who had captured her because they were losing the war, and the colonialists had burned all their fields, and it was winter, and it's about her survival, and it's an incredibly brutal book. It's really racist, although race in a different way than we conceive of it, but it really feels to me like it contains so much about what it means to be an American in terms of race and gender.
In the novel, it's about a woman who moves from California pregnant back to the East Coast, to the Adirondacks, and then becomes sort of, starts to become obsessed and embodied. This has got a million other things because it's actually the most wonderful book, so I hope you pick up that as well. I want to open it up for questions, and maybe if you want to read more or what, but there's a lot of questions I have, but I'm sure other people might want to chime in as well. So.
Anybody else have anything they want to talk about? Yeah.
Question for you, Micah.
Yeah.
You read the long list of research
Yeah.
you had done.
Yeah.
When I write, I tend to write from the idea, and if I get to a point where there's something I don't know, then I do the research.
Yeah.
Is your writing then research-based, and you fill in the space in between the ideas?
Oh, good question. I think both, actually. So, like with that Houdini story, it was more that I learned that stuff and then put it into a story. But then with with more of it. So sometimes I get very obsessed and attracted by some historical anecdote or weird thing, But other stuff I need it, like you did. Like I just I want there to be a dildo in the story, so I gotta Google, what's gonna be, or what kind of weed would they be smoking that is golden, so it goes both ways. Yeah, good question. Anybody else? Yeah.
You mentioned how you use stories. You talked about how you change them around, changing gender or setting or whatever.
Yeah.
Were all of these stories published elsewhere in another guise, or did you add stories to this collection to make the links work?
Actually, I took out stories. When I first thought I was going to do a collection, there was, I think more like 16 stories, and including 2 that were unpublished. And then when I linked them up, there were some stories that I just couldn't make work. They didn't fit, and so I pulled them. And then, so now there's only one story that has never been published before in any form. And then the other ones some of them are changed. Like the last story is pretty radically changed. Like I'm not sure anyone would recognize it, but it published in a radically different form. And then some of them are pretty, not so different. Yeah, but it was more like I needed to take things out that didn't fit. Yeah.
Among other things, the last story is kind of a homage to the Moomin Trolls. There are
That's
Moomin
true.
Troll fans, of which I am one.
yes, I love Moon Patrol. If any of you have not read Finn Family Moon Patrol, I suggest it. Yeah, almost
know-
as good as this book.
Micah,
Yeah.
at what age did you begin to experience yourself as a writer? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I was a reader first, like a lot of writers. I loved reading, and my dad, he used to tell me these stories about Jack the Snap, the killer whale, when I was a little girl, and he would illustrate them, and he was an artist, and so I had this idea that it was possible to make up your own stories, and then I think when the commune dissolved and I moved out, that was a huge shock, and I think that's when I started writing. You know, that I but I feel like I was sort of writing this magical circle around me so I could feel protected and kind of be a miraculous escape, you know. So I read and wrote to not be present in the world for about a year. And
What age were you then?
I was 10 or 11, yeah.
Early adolescence.
Yeah, really early, yeah. And then I pretty much just continued writing from there. And I think I always kind of thought I was going to write. Or I was writing, writing, yeah. Yes.
I think Peter described your collection as prismatic, and I wonder how has poetry informed your writing?
I love that question. Well, I don't write poetry, but I'm a big fan of poetry. And one of the things, a way to get into, so if I'm writing every morning, then I often read poetry first to sort of get my mind in a compressed and lyrical mode, and so I think it's a way of, I think I'm just a fangirl of poetry more than anything else, and that and it is also extremely helpful in terms of thinking about compression, thinking about how do you write about something in the most compressed, most intense, most distilled way possible. Plus, it's just poetry's great. So, yeah, I think that. Yeah. Any other questions?
Can you talk about first sentences?
Oh, yeah.
You didn't read Kiro by Lars Slow with you tonight,
Yeah.
so you all have to read it because it's a wonderful story.
Yeah, that's what he wanted me to
Can you read the first line at least?
Okay.
And I just wanted to
I don't even
talk
know.
about entry points, like does the
Sure.
story come with a first line like this, for example?
Okay, so I'll read the first line. This story's called Quiero bailar slow with you tonight. The first time we had sex, my lover whispered, Sadie, I have never made love in English before. Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah.
I came as if everything were pouring out of me, and afterwards, with our foreheads touching, I sighed, Que cosa más linda. I don't speak Spanish. What did I just say? It means the prettiest thing, he smiled. I looked up at the ceiling as if I could see through it to the sky. He slid his hand gently over my breast. You are spectacular, he said, and I believed him.
And so these characters recur. Sadie and Daniel sort of recur, and every story is somewhat related. So the Houdini reporter is the grandfather, and just there are ways in which the story is like a weird. Prismatic is your word, which is better than any word I said, because it actually does describe kind of the effect of this book. But in a story like this, was that the entry point? Was that
the beginning? No, that wasn't the beginning of the
Really?
story. In fact, when it was published, it had a different beginning. It began when my lover was 14 in Santiago de Chile. He and his novia decided to make love. That used to be the ending. That was when I published it. That was
why the switch? And that begins the next block of text.
yeah. The switch was because this is going to be so it's just going to be practical, which is that the switch is that I wanted the Houdini story ends where the journalist starts talking about his grandchildren, and he names them, their name's Sadie and Isaac, and he's worrying about how they're going to turn out. And then I wanted the first line to have Sadie's name in it so that you knew that this was a story about like what the link was. So it used to be a block of text that came after the other one, and I pulled it up there so that you would know that it was about
But
Sadie.
it sort of gets to what I'm after with trying to describe the story, which is this collection, which is really difficult, which is every story does sort of bleed into each other in a way that I haven't ever quite seen before, and I think it may be these first sentences that you had to rework in order so that the stories would speak to each other pretty directly, even though they're radically different. So that,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that describes it, but that was the feeling.
Yeah,
that I had.
I did try to have like right up front so you know how who it is and how they're connected to the other people. Yeah.
And I could go through and read a ton of these, but
Yeah.
but that's sort of each one. It's like you're starting a new world, but it's weird. You feel like they're somehow, kind of somehow cosmically speaking to each other.
Yeah.
Any other
Any
questions?
other thing we should talk about? Anybody been reading anything good lately?
You open that up. Can I ask you about the cemetery story?
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that's actually the one that hasn't been published before.
And what about that? You have characters who are looking for graves: Colette, Sarah Bernhardt, Edith Piaf,
Yeah.
Isadora Duncan, and of course Heloise and Abelard. All these people who had shown courage and love. I felt a quickening of renewed hope.
Yeah. Well, that's a story. It's about this man and this woman who have been apart. They were lovers when they were young, and they get back together, and now they both have children. And and they had had this very romantic. Basically, it's the couple from that I just read the first sentence from, and it's really a story about the conflict between romance and reality, right, and pragmatism. And she had gone through a lot. She's had a rough life, and in the intervening years, and she's kind of feels burnt out. She's not sure if she's all up for romance anymore. And so she's trying, she's in Paris, in the Père Lachaise cemetery, as Peter read, surrounded by all these incredibly romantic figures, or not. I mean, that's part of it. That all of those stories that you just listed, Peter, have dark sides, or very, they all have realism, like some pretty bitter sides to them. And so she finds out about the bitter sides as she goes along, and so she's kind of keeps flipping back and forth, like should I allow myself to feel romantic and hopeful, or should I squish it like a bug?
And maybe she doesn't. I won't answer that question,
Yeah.
but I think the last story and the second to last story very much speak to each other in a very direct way.
Yeah.
And so the answer is that the practicality. Would I be giving it
No,
away?
no, go ahead.
That they meet.
Yeah.
Roughly.
Yeah.
As they can. And so I felt.
Yeah.
But the last story, I mean, it's hilarious, the last story in a lot of ways, the Moomintroll story I mentioned, but it also does show the trajectory. And that's why I think it's an unusual book, and unlike a story collection that I know of, in the sense that you really do travel through decades with these people, with individual people, and their stories, it seems to me.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
If I have one
Oh,
quick
yeah,
question
no,
following
go.
Peter's comment about the entry point for the particular story. Did you rearrange that block of text so that the story would stand alone by itself, or was it consideration in the collection, so the collection flowed together?
You mean the one we just talked about
Yeah, the
earlier?
one we just
Oh, no,
talked
it was for the collection.
It was
So
for
when
the
the story was on its own, I had a different beginning, because I felt like you could get more slowly into
Okay, yeah.
who it was. And then when it was a collection, I wanted you to know right up front.
Yeah, I thought that's
Yeah.
what you meant. I wasn't
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It changes it time-wise, though. I mean, it
Yeah, it does.
it
Yeah.
lengthens the time frame by starting the way you started the second time.
Yeah,
Seems to me.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Any last questions?
Yes.
Going back to the idea you just mentioned about how your works are like, they have like a touch of lightness and they also have this heaviness. And like your Houdini story where you bring this like very historical character into an upbeat setting, like down for your life. Like, what is your inspiration for this like bittersweet setting?
Oh, the bittersweet. Okay, well, I think my inspiration, when I was in undergrad in college, I had this friend. She was a painter and a printmaker, and I was a junior and she was a senior, and I thought she was the coolest human being on the planet. She looked like Louise Brooks. She had this little haircut like that, and she's super, I just felt she was so much more sophisticated than I was. And she told me that every great story, the register is always funny sad. She said it has to be funny sad, and that all great art, all great, everything is funny sad. And that really, I was like, yeah, that's true. And I think that's stuck with me. I mean, she said it, but it also really resonated with me, and I think that's pretty much the register that I go for almost all the time. I think that I agree that that's I love that. I love that play between sadness and humor, and that's probably what I want to read, maybe. So I think, I'd probably go even farther than sad, sometimes into like rage or bitterness, but definitely go back to hold those two things in balance, to have things be almost, I guess I think almost anything can be funny if you look at it a certain way, and then you can turn it and suddenly it's not funny at all anymore. That's a good question. Well, I think why don't we take a pause, and I'm happy to talk to anybody individually, or we can just hang out and drink cider, and I could sign any books if anybody wants me to. Thank you so much for coming.